Can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning, my name is Julian. I'm a PhD student at the James Hutton Institute and the University of Dundee. And today I will bring you all on a journey to the tropics, because who doesn't like the tropics, right? So my research is looking at landscape sustainability from an agent-based modeling perspective. Tropical regions nowadays present a trade-off to society. It is mainly based on the fact that we need to increase food production in order to feed an increasing population, the very well-known climate change issue, where tropical forests are very important in terms of carbon sequestration, plus biodiversity conservation. Now, what's the main problem in tropical areas nowadays? That economic forces driving land use change, driven by the current market economy, are more powerful than protection forces. So, as a general rule, what's going on in the wet tropics is that much more land is being cleared for agriculture than land is being protected. And even the number of protected areas is increasing. We see that our biodiversity loss is still decreasing. So why is this? Why is this going on? However, this situation is not the same in all the tropical regions. So this is the wet tropics of Queensland in the northeast of Australia. And they have a very typical situation in that sense compared to other tropical regions. So first of all, 50% of the land is protected, which is pretty unusual for being a tropical region. And in terms of governance, we see how this region has gone from a single focus governance in terms of landscape management in the 70s, 80s, focus on just clearing the land for timber production and production of other goods, to a more multifunctional view of the landscape. So nowadays, this region, which is a bit smaller than Scotland in size, is being managed to produce different services. Apart from conserving biodiversity, to increase carbon sequestration, to produce steel with goods such as sugarcane and so on. So my research is looking at to which extent we want to test the hypothesis that the wet tropics of Australia is sustainable, being sustainable as enhancing synergies between sugarcane production, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. And sustainability in this model means just that. I know it's a very broad concept, but this is how we consider for this research. So my research is basically based on simulating different future land use scenarios and see how they affect landscape sustainability. The framework considered in my research is the following. Is the land sharing, land spreading framework. So basically, landscape management can be divided in two ways based on this framework. We have land spreading, which is basically dividing the landscape in two. You have an example on that square. So basically, you spare the land for protection and focus the rest of the landscape on production, while land sharing will be integrating both. So you have low intensity agriculture mixed with semi-natural areas. So this is just an example of both cases. Land sparing, you can see the protected forest on the one hand, and agriculture on the other hand, and land sharing, which is more like an integrated agri-ecological matrix. The methodological framework, I will go very quickly through this, is basically agent-based modeling, which I will explain a bit what is it, and it's integrated because we use also other methods. We use maps, GIS layers, empirical data, expert opinion, and Bayesian belief networks. So what is agent-based modeling? So agent-based modeling is a bottom-up dynamic modeling technique, which basically is used to represent how complex system works, such as socio-ecological systems. So this is the methodology applied to our case study. So this is the land use map for 2015 for the wet tropics. 3 main land uses. In green, protected areas, in red, sugarcane, agriculture, and in yellow, semi-natural areas. So basically, we import the land use map into our agent-based modeling software. And if you have a look to the snapshot, so the squares in that square are land uses, and we have the so-known agents, which are the key of agent-based modeling. So agents can be anything. It depends on the context it's being studied. In our case, agents are those policies driving land use change in the wet tropics. Now we have 3 different types of agents. We have agents driving protection, we have agents driving development, and we have agents driving restoration. So based on the three on GIS layers, expert opinion and BVNs, agents move and interact between them and with the landscape, and they create outcomes, which will be our results. Again, we test this under three different scenarios. We have a business as usual, which is the current situation in the wet tropics, which is basically the number of protected areas is increasing. The land sparing, which is increasing protected areas and sugarcane production. And land sharing, which is the opposite of land sparing, basically decreasing sugarcane and protected areas and increasing semi-natural areas. The results so far, we have some special explicit results. So I'm not going into much detail, but basically we have three different scenarios here: business as usual, land sparing, and land sharing for three different types of time steps. And basically the maps are telling us how land use change over time. In the business as usual scenario, the clear green dots are new protected areas. In the land sparing, we have new protected areas in clear green and new sugarcane in light red too. And in the land sharing scenario, we have a decrease in protected areas in green and an increase on semi-natural areas. We have also some graphical results which tell us about this, how sustainable, based on our framework, with the wet tropics is. We have biodiversity, sugarcane, and carbon sequestration, the last two both in tones and monetary value. I want just to grab your attention into the green trends, which is the business as usual, which is the one showing the most increasing trends, sustainable results. So we can see that the business as usual for biodiversity is actually increasing, with also steady or increasing carbon sequestration and sugarcane. This is probably the most interesting results in terms of governance. So what is this telling us? All right, so again, agents are forces driving protection, development, or restoration. What happens if we increase the number of agents, that is, if we strengthen the forces driving protection? As we can see, biodiversity increases, as you can see from the top heat map. However, what happens, and this is the interesting thing here, what happens if there are more policies driving development? What happens if there are more policies increasing sugarcane production? It doesn't really affect biodiversity. And the reason for that is because, again, the wet tropic, the conservation governance in the wet tropics is much stronger than in most tropical regions, that it doesn't really matter that new policies are created enhancing sugarcane production, that conservation will be still stronger. So the message that I want you to take home is basically that, contrary to most tropical regions, the business as usual, we have an example of a sustainable business as usual scenario here. And it's quite atypical compared to other tropical regions. Now, the second point here is, why is this happening? And to which extent can we extrapolate the situation in the wet tropics to other tropical regions to make them more sustainable? Well, this is part of a paper that we're working on, but basically we said that it's very difficult to extrapolate because the socioeconomic situation in the wet tropics is very different. So basically, the reason why conservation governance is that strong is because in the 70s, 80s, there was a rise on environmental awareness in this region, and this is combined with the current strong conservation governance. We have a top-down, bottom-up network of conservation that actually makes land protecting more stronger than development in that sense. However, an issue in that sense is the so-known idea of public biodiversity discourse. So this idea is the fact that people tend to think that because we are protecting the landscape, we are already free to develop or clear more land for production. So basically the Queensland and Australian governments say, all right, we have 50% of the land protected in the wet tropics up there, so we can just spare land for production elsewhere. The result is that nowadays in Queensland, only 5% of land is protected in Queensland, which I guess is basically the protection area in the wet tropics. So this is a very dangerous situation in that sense. So Queensland and Australian government should actually address sustainability issue across the country from an overall point of view and across the regions, and not just justify development by sparing land for protection up there in the wet tropics. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, we've got plenty of time for questions. Cool. Got a question here.
So why do you think there was such an awareness for biodiversity conservation in that area, and that doesn't happen in other places like maybe Scotland as strongly? I mean,
as strongly. Yeah, there are different socioeconomic factors that actually created this situation. It started everything, well, in the 70s, 80s. There were a lot of riots, and the environmental awareness of the communities, actually, and local people increased. And that was what actually pushed the government in order to, and the consequence that this became a World Heritage Site in 1987, I think. So it was a bottom-up force that created this situation. Plus, there are other factors, such as the fact that this is a developed country. Most tropical regions are in developing countries, so the funding for conservation is not the same. So in that sense, there are different combinations of factors that made this situation, creating this more sustainable region in that sense. Yeah.
I had a question. So you mentioned that the situation is very different and atypical because of the conservation policies that they have in place. Can you mention some examples, and also how stable those policies are? Will they be affected by the change in the government?
So there's this sugarcane production, the sugarcane industry, which covers 8% of the land, is quite limited in the sense that, and it's very atypical compared to other tropical regions, that other industries in other tropical regions actually have free space to expand, while in this case, because again so much area is protected, the situation is quite locked up. So the sugarcane industry doesn't have much space to actually be expanded, and even more and more bank credits are actually allocated for sugarcane expansion from international banks. But in spite of that, the sugarcane industry is unsustainable, is non-profitable. So which means that they don't actually, even though you keep increasing the forces driving, expanding sugarcane production, it doesn't really work because the extent of land protected is so much, based on different policies, which I cannot tell you right now. But that the sugarcane industry is quite limited in that sense, and it cannot really increase more than 8%. So that's why economic forces are quite limited and constrained in the wet tropics.
We had another question here.
Thank you for your talk. I'm very surprised to hear anything in Australian conservation described as sustainable. I was wondering, so how does ecotourism fit in the picture? Because with that much protected area, the area around Cairns, that's a tourism hotspot.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you think is that sustainable?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually in Cairns for 6 months doing this work. So we have to differentiate between the wet tropics has 2 World Heritage Sites, the Great Barrier Reef and the rainforests. And it's the only place in the world that has 2 World Heritage Sites. So here I'm not including the Great Barrier Reef. So it's very well known, all the issues with the Great Barrier Reef, with contamination, agricultural-based contamination, diving and so on, that is actually climate change, that is actually affecting the Great Barrier Reef. So in that sense, if I will include conservation of the Great Barrier Reef in this model, the results probably will be different, unsustainable. However, in terms of the rainforest, the tourism is very aware. It's a bottom-up, also positive force in that sense. As a general rule, tourists are aware of the high importance from an environmental point of view of this region. So all of them actually, like tourists that come, they have this feeling that actually, okay, they have to take care of the environment. We're in a place that is like the jewel of Australia. So they come with this idea that this area should be protected. Again, it's not the same for the Great Barrier Reef, that's another different story. But yeah, also that's the case.
Great, well I think we'll let you off the hook there. Let's thank Gillian for a great talk.